Right now, as you're reading these words, you feel like you chose to click on this video. You didn't have to. You could have scrolled past. You could be watching something else entirely. And yet, here you are, and it feels like you put yourself here. But what if that feeling is the most convincing lie your brain has ever told you? In 1983, a scientist wired people's heads to a machine and asked them to do something almost embarrassingly simple: lift a finger whenever they felt like it. No pressure, no pattern, just a spontaneous little motion whenever the urge struck. He wanted to measure the exact moment the decision happened, the moment free will switched on. What he found didn't just surprise him. It unsettled an entire field of science and philosophy that hasn't fully recovered since. Because the brain activity that produced the finger movement began before the person felt like they'd decided to move it. Not by a lot. A few hundred milliseconds. But enough. Enough to suggest that by the time you feel like you're choosing, some part of you has already chosen for you. Sit with that for a second. Not as a fun fact, as a threat to something you've never questioned. Every apology you've ever meant, every time you've said, "I could have done better," every ounce of pride you've felt for a decision well made, all of it assumes one thing: that when the moment came, you could have chosen otherwise. That's the whole foundation. Remove it, and something strange happens to the entire architecture of being human. So the question isn't just academic. It's personal. It's the question underneath every other question you've ever asked about yourself. Are you the author of your life? Or are you reading a story that was already written, one neuron at a time, and simply mistaking the reading for the writing? To understand how deep this problem goes, we have to go back further than neuroscience. Back past Freud, past Darwin, all the way to a Greek word that meant something closer to fate than freedom. The ancient Stoics, particularly a philosopher named Chrysippus, imagined the universe as an unbroken chain. One event causing the next, without gaps, without exceptions, a cosmos as tightly linked as falling dominoes stretching back to the beginning of time. If that's true, then your decision to watch this video wasn't really a decision at all. It was the last domino in a chain that started before you were born, before your parents were born, before language existed to describe the problem. This idea has a name: determinism, and it doesn't need ancient philosophy to make its case anymore. Modern physics makes almost the identical argument using entirely different language. Every particle in your brain right now is obeying the same physical laws that govern falling rocks and orbiting planets. Neurons fire because of prior neurons firing. Chemical gradients shift because of prior chemical gradients. If the universe really is just matter in motion, governed by cause and effect with no exceptions, then your thoughts are simply weather happening inside your skull. Complicated weather. Weather that talks. But weather nonetheless, and nobody blames a hurricane for where it goes. This is where most people expect the video to end. Determinism wins. Free will is an illusion. Roll credits. Feel slightly hollow for the rest of the day. But that would be intellectually lazy, because the story is far stranger than you have no free will. And the alternative might be even more unsettling than the problem it was meant to solve. Here's the twist almost nobody talks about. Even if determinism is false, even if the universe has genuine randomness baked into it, the way quantum physics suggests it might, that doesn't rescue free will either. It just replaces one problem with another. Think about it carefully. If your decision to raise your hand right now was caused by nothing at all, a random quantum fluctuation, an uncaused event bursting into existence, In what sense is that decision yours? A random event isn't an expression of your character, your values, your history. It's just noise. You didn't control the dice. Randomness doesn't give you authorship. It just makes the story messier. So here is the paradox sitting at the center of one of philosophy's oldest arguments. If your actions are caused, they seem determined and therefore not free. But if your actions are uncaused, they seem random and therefore not yours either. Free will appears to need a third option that doesn't seem to exist anywhere in physical reality. Philosophers call this the dilemma of free will, and for centuries, some of the sharpest minds in human history have tried to find a way out of it. One way out came from an unlikely place. Not a rejection of determinism, but an argument that determinism was never really the enemy to begin with. Philosophers who take this position are called compatibilists, and the most influential modern voice among them, Harry Frankfurt, offered a reframing that quietly changed the conversation. He argued that freedom was never about escaping causation. It was about what kind of causation was doing the driving. Imagine two people, both addicted to the same drug. The first one hates the addiction, fights it every single day, wishes with everything in them that they wanted something different, and still they use. The second person is also addicted, but they don't mind. They want the drug. Their desires align with their deeper desires. Frankfurt's insight is that these two people, though behaving identically, are not free in the same way. The first person is a prisoner of a desire they didn't endorse. The second, disturbingly, might actually be free, not because they escaped causation, but because their action expressed what they, at the deepest level, actually wanted. Freedom, on this view, was never about being uncaused. It was about being undivided. About your actions flowing from desires you would choose to have, if you could choose your desires at all. This idea reframes the entire question. Maybe free will was never about defying physics. Maybe it was about the relationship between your actions and your deepest self, even if that self was shaped entirely by genetics, upbringing, culture, and neurons you never asked for. And this is where psychology quietly enters the room and makes the picture even more uncomfortable and even more human. In the 1960s and 70s, decades before Libet's famous experiment, a psychologist named Julian Rotter had already begun mapping something adjacent, what he called locus of control. Some people, he found, consistently interpret events as within their control. Others consistently interpret events as happening to them, dictated by luck, fate, or outside forces. What Rotter discovered next is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. This belief, all on its own, regardless of whether it was philosophically true, predicted real outcomes. People with a strong internal locus of control tended to persist longer through hardship, recover faster from failure, and report higher well-being. In other words, believing you have agency, whether or not you metaphysically do, changes your behavior in measurable physical ways. This finding was echoed decades later by researchers investigating how people respond when told free will is a myth. Participants primed to disbelieve in free will became measurably more likely to cheat, more aggressive, less helpful to others. Not because disbelief revealed some hidden truth about human nature, but because the belief itself functioned like a psychological support beam. Remove it, and something in people's moral architecture sagged. This doesn't settle the metaphysical question. It complicates it in a far more interesting way. It suggests that free will might not simply be true or false, the way a fact about the physical world is true or false. It might be something closer to a load-bearing belief, A story the human mind needs, functionally, regardless of what's happening at the level of neurons and quantum fields underneath it. Which brings us to the philosopher who perhaps understood the emotional stakes of this problem better than anyone, Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre didn't spend his life defending free will against physics. He took it as a starting point, almost as an article of faith, and then followed its implications to a place most people flinch away from. If you are truly radically free, if there is no fixed human nature dictating who you must become, then you are, in his words, condemned to be free. Not blessed, condemned, because every excuse collapses. You cannot blame your childhood, your culture, your biology without, in some sense, choosing to hide behind them. Sartre called this self-deception bad faith, the quiet, constant temptation to pretend you are a thing shaped by forces, rather than a freedom that keeps choosing, moment by moment, who to become. It's worth pausing here, because this is the emotional center of the entire question. Most people don't actually want radical, ungrounded, terrifying freedom. It's easier to believe you couldn't have done otherwise. Determinism, for all its cold implications, offers something strangely comforting, an alibi. If everything was always going to happen exactly this way, then nothing is truly your fault, and nothing was truly your triumph either. Sartre's freedom offers no such comfort. It hands you the full, unbearable weight of authorship. You were never really afraid that you weren't free. You were afraid of what it would mean if you were. So where does this leave us? Somewhere between Chrysippus's chain of causation, Libet's flickering half-second, Frankfurt's undivided desires, and Sartre's unbearable freedom. Perhaps the most honest answer isn't a triumphant yes or a nihilistic no. Perhaps it's a reframing of the question itself. The neuroscience doesn't actually prove that you didn't decide to move your finger. It complicates what you even means. The unconscious brain activity Libet measured wasn't some alien force hijacking your body. It was you. Just a layer of you that operates beneath the spotlight of conscious awareness. The same way your heartbeat is you, your digestion is you, your instinctive flinch from a hot stove is you, even though none of it waited for your permission. Modern cognitive science increasingly supports something like this layered picture. The conscious, narrating mind, the I that feels like it's steering, may function less like a commander issuing orders and more like a press secretary, making sense of decisions that emerge from deeper, faster, largely unconscious processes, then presenting them to you and to others as a coherent, deliberate choice. This doesn't mean the choice wasn't yours. It means you were always bigger, stranger, and less centrally controlled than the feeling of choosing led you to believe. And maybe that's the actual revelation hiding inside this 2,000-year-old question. Not that free will is fake, not that determinism has won, but that the version of freedom most people are looking for, a ghost inside the machine, floating free of causes, uncaused and untouched by biology or history, was never a coherent idea to begin with. It was a myth built to make us feel like exceptions to the universe rather than expressions of it. The freedom that survives all this scrutiny is smaller and somehow more remarkable. It's not freedom from causation. It's the freedom of a system complex enough to reflect on its own causes, to weigh its own desires, to occasionally rewrite through reflection the very patterns that produced it. A river doesn't choose its path in the sense of standing outside the landscape and picking a direction, but a river carved by reflection, capable of noticing its own banks and gradually reshaping them, that's a different kind of river than the one Chrysippus imagined, and maybe a more honest picture of what you actually are. So when you ask whether your choices are really yours, the most rigorous answer available today isn't a clean yes or no. It's this. Your choices emerge from a self that is entirely the product of causes you didn't choose. Genes, upbringing, culture, neurons firing in the dark half a second before you notice, and yet that self is still, unmistakably, the only one doing the choosing. There is no other candidate, no ghost waiting in the wings, just you, causally embedded, and still, somehow, the author signing the page. You came here asking whether you're free. Maybe the better question is, what kind of freedom is actually worth wanting? Not the fantasy of an uncaused self floating above your own biology and history, but the quieter, harder freedom of becoming someone who reflects on their causes and occasionally, through that reflection, bends them. If a river can be said to carve its own path, so perhaps can you. So tell me, if you learned today that every choice you've made was in some sense caused by something you didn't choose, would that change how you see your past? Or would it change nothing at all, because you'd still have to get up tomorrow and choose anyway? Leave your answer below, I'll be reading.